You know, we were supposed to do this a few days ago and we had to change it, but this turned into the best birthday present that I could have.
Happy birthday.
One of my favorite rock stars on my birthday. So thank you for rescheduling.
It's my pleasure.
Um, I want to talk about Sleepwalker a lot because I like it, but do you mind if we go through your history a little bit?
Not at all.
I'm sure everyone's trying to do that with you. I know you're from St. Louis originally. Can you tell us a little bit about what your childhood was like and when you started to get into music?
Sure. I had big brothers and sisters, and some of my earliest memories are, and a little brother. And there were always records around my house, floating around my house, music, floating through my house. My dad loved Cole Porter and loved music, loved classical music, and we had a stereo in our living room. My mom liked Joni Mitchell and Billy Preston and various other, artists of the Carly Simon and things like that in the 70s. And then my brother, big brother and sister whom I worshiped, they were into classic rock. Hendrix, let's see, the Stones, the Who, very much the Who, Zeppelin, Aerosmith, Eric Clapton, well, I guess it was Cream, and the Birds, the Yardbirds was his band. Anyway, I'm trying to remember like everything that was coming through my house. They loved Traffic and they loved the Beatles. And one of the first records that was given to me was Abbey Road by my big brother Kenny.
That's a good one.
Yep. And Fleetwood Mac Rumors, one of my first records. Dreamboat Annie by Heart. And I was mesmerized by Anna and Nancy Wilson. Just would stare at that album cover, and listen to that song over and over, and to the album itself. And the Mamas and the Papas and the harmonies in that band were just incredible. And I think one of my, actually even prior to that, was Peter, Paul and Mary. My mother gave me that. My mother played that for me. And I used to love those songs, and like Lemon Tree and Blown in the Wind and whatever, like those beautiful songs. But I remember hearing the Beatles for the first time and just thinking, oh my God, what is this? Like hearing Come Together was the coolest thing I'd ever heard. And then Golden Years by Bowie on the radio, and thinking this just loving that song so much, and my mind was blown. And so I got David Bowie Changes One for my birthday, and those are some of my favorite early records. I have to let my dog out. Hold on a second.
My cat usually makes an appearance and when I record it in my office at home, so he might show up. You started playing piano at an early age, didn't you?
Yeah, I started playing piano, and I think as early as I can remember, I was playing piano. I started taking lessons at 7, I think, but I was playing piano from as soon as I could. My next door neighbor, Sue Leonard, she was my best friend, and she was a little older, and she taught me Heart and Soul and would play that with me. And I just recently taught my nieces Heart and Soul, and it was so sweet. It was so meaningful to watch them plunk it out, and they're twins. And now they know how to play it together, the top and the bottom. So when I go home to St. Louis, I get to see them perform it and hear it. It's so sweet. It was great joy, and learning the top part and playing it in duet. Like it was so much fun. And then when I was 9, this boy I had a crush on, who was in my little group. We called ourselves gangs. My big brother had a gang, my big sister had a gang. There were all kinds of kids on the block, but they were like big Catholic families with 12 kids in them and 7 kids in them. And we all kind of paired off into our age groups and misbehaved together. And our parents were never watching. And I remember this boy had gave me the album Bread, Baby I'm Gonna Want You. And God, I love that album. I loved it so much. So I've always loved music. And Ringo Starr's solo album was amazing. And the musicals that came around, like at that time, like my mom and dad took my brother and sister to see Hair, and I was so mad I didn't get to go because there was a naked scene and I wasn't allowed. But they brought home the record for me, and I played it down to the bare bones. And Godspell, also one of my favorite records.
Wow, had a lot of music around you when you were young.
You didn't expect that answer, but yeah, and then I was in musicals from a young age, in choirs, just as long as I can remember. And I played music with my mom. My mom played guitar and taught me how to sing in harmony. And that became like a defining part of my life, obviously.
You played in a couple of bands in St. Louis, but you played keyboards in those bands, right?
I played in a band called, played in a band with my brother called The Prodigy. This was before Prodigy.
I think I heard that somewhere in an interview.
Yeah. And we did like Go-Go's covers. I played Our Lips Are Sealed and Vanity Six covers. And then I was in a band where I did play some keyboards. I mostly sang because I had another keyboardist. And yeah, and that's what I played. And then I didn't start playing guitar until I was like 20 in college.
Yeah, I was going to jump ahead to that because I know you went to Barnard College. How did you decide to go to school there? That's a good school.
Yeah, it's a great school. My stepmom went there and my stepsister went there, who I just consider my sister. And she was 4 years older. So I went and visited. I didn't want to go to college. I want to stay in this band in St. Louis. And my mother said, we're going on a college trip, honey. And took me back east. We went and visited the Seven Sister schools, mainly because my mom went to Sarah Lawrence, my stepmother went to Barnard, and there's a history of that in my family. It intrigued me going to an all-women's college. So
Wellesley, you mean like Wellesley and Smith were probably on that list too?
Yeah, Wellesley, Smith, Mount Holyoke, Barnard. Let's see, we also visited Wesleyan and Princeton.
Wow.
My dad went. And I visited New York City, and after all the other ones, like at Mount Holyoke, it was beautiful. I mean, it's a gorgeous campus, an incredible school. But I remember them saying at 10 o'clock, we give the girls milk and cookies every night. And then I contrast that with this gorgeous dining hall, and then contrast that with Barnard in the middle of Manhattan, well, upper Manhattan. And this, like, their dining hall was, the Columbia had a really nice dining hall, but Barnard across the street, we got like, it looked like my cafeteria from, grade school. And there were no frills. I mean, Barnard is a lovely place, but there were no frills. But it was New York, and my sister took me to the East Village, and then took me on the subway, and I rode the train for the first time, and it smelled like piss. And we went up to her apartment in Spanish Harlem. We stopped at the liquor store and got Lay's potato chips and vodka and orange juice, made screwdrivers, and stayed up till the wee hours. And I thought, I'm coming here. This is where I want to be. It's New York City. And that was that.
I read or heard in an interview that you were a fan of Suzanne Vega, who also went there. I bring this up because I got to meet and work with Suzanne a little when I worked at A&M Records. She was cool, very cool. You really liked her, apparently, huh?
Oh, yeah. I came across her music at that time. I think sophomore year in college, they stuck me and a bunch of the students off campus at this building called the Lucerne on 79th in Amsterdam. And I was in an air shaft. And there were a lot of people with fixed housing, fixed rents so there was like a real elderly set, and then a bunch of young Barnard sprites coming into that building in flux. And it was a big contrast, the tenants in the building. There was a couple that would just throw plates up and down the hall and yell at each other while we were in study hall. It was just nuts. There was a guy next to us who would just moan at night, and it was, there was nothing we could do to help him. It was very weird. Anyway, it was a strange year because I was off campus and I was commuting in a school bus, And we didn't have any light in our apartment, like really green depressing carpeting, and really no sunlight, because we were on an air shaft, and I remember the radiator just clanging all the time. And we didn't have a kitchen, so we'd wash our dishes like in the sink and the bathtub. My stepmom, who went to Barnard, was horrified when she came to visit. She's like, for the money we spent for you to go here, I can't believe they have you here. But it was home. And the point is that they were playing Luca on the radio at the time, and I was listening, and I can't remember when I got that record, but this preceded Luca. Yeah, Luca was on the record with Cracking, and I was in love with her music. And then I discovered that she and I shared later I found out we shared a thesis advisor, and she was one of my favorite professors in college, named 𝘠𝘠𝘬𝘭𝘥. And Suzanne Vega had also been an English major. She may have had something to do with my choosing my major, although I was already on track for that. But she really influenced me. I mean, I really identified with her songs, with her songwriting, with where I was in my life, and I thought she was incredible. I still do. And then Tom Steiner came out, which is of course where we all ate, and it looks nothing like it does in Seinfeld. It's a different interior, just so everybody knows. It's the same out. You can see the sign outside, but that's not our Tom Steiner inside. And then there was a centennial celebration of Carnegie Hall, and Suzanne Vega and Laurie Anderson, also a Barnard alum, played there.
Oh yeah,
that was really, really nice to go see. Really special. And I saw her play in St. Louis one after college, I think. And I've always adored her.
Wow. I also heard that you started playing guitar in college, and I don't know if this is true or not, but was Chinese Rocks the first song that you learned how to play on guitar? I think I heard that in an interview at one point.
Yeah, it was. A woman who lived down the hall from me at that time in that apartment. She became a good friend, and I still just adore her. And I'm so grateful to her for just going, here, take my guitar. Here's a chord book and some sheet music to the Love Boat theme song. And I'm going to teach you how to play Chinese Rocks. And that was it. And I was off to the races. Yeah.
Were you like a fan of the Dolls and the Ramones at that time, or did she just turn you onto this track?
Well, I mean, I loved the Ramones. But I didn't know, I wasn't like, I mean, I had the record I listened to it in high school a lot with Beat on the Brat. And what record was that? Just called the Ramones.
Yeah, I think it was their first record. Yeah.
Yeah. That record was incredible. And I listened to that ad nauseum in high school. So, but I didn't know Chinese Rocks actually when she taught it to me.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
You started writing poetry in college too. So is that when you kind of tried to figure out how to put it all together with the guitar and the poetry, or were they separate for you at that time?
You really done your homework. I'm so impressed. Thank you for taking the time to know this about me. I did. Yeah. It was a confluence of different things for sure. I mean, Suzanne Vega's music read like poetry, and I started writing poetry. I had begun writing it really when I was like 10 years old, and we moved houses. And
you wrote poetry when you were a lot younger.
Well, I did. I started writing poetry at a young age.
That's cool.
I found solace in just sitting alone with a notebook and starting to write poetry. Actually, the first poem I wrote in calligraphy in second grade, and it was called Sun, Wind, Rain. And my mom had it framed on her wall for a long time. And it was, in the beginning, I was not alive. Then I went out into the world and found life. I felt the breeze of wind, the warmness of sun, drops of rain. Now I am alive.
Wow. I can't believe you remember that.
It was on the wall. I asked her recently if she still had it. She said no.
Wow.
But yeah, I think in hindsight, like, especially now that I have a child, I I think there's something pretty profound about that. Um, just that came out of a second grader. Um, because when we're younger, we're able to remember what it was like before. And at least I believe that from having experienced, well, certainly at some point experiencing it myself, but watching it with my child and watching it with other people's children and reading a lot about it and watching a lot about it, just remembering the younger children, remembering what it was like before. We don't have to go into all of that, but whether it's past lives or the time between lives, it's been described to me by my own child in different ways. So I just love that, the idea that back then I had some kind of recollection of just the beginning,
Yeah.
what the beginning was. Instead of my beginning was my first cry after I was born. But yeah, I found solace in writing poetry after my parents divorced and we moved to a new house, and I would sit out in the front stoop with my notebook, and I just remember it very vividly, just starting to write poetry then. But I didn't really necessarily write through high school. And then in college, I took a serious poetry writing class, and I was told I wouldn't get anything more than a C by my submissions. After having read my submissions, this visiting professor said, just want you to know, you won't get more than a C in this class. If you're welcome to take it. And I was like, oh, really? Let's see about that now, won't we? And I did not get a C. I did much more than that. But I was definitely inspired by the poetry that I read in the class, Audre Lorde poetry, these very powerful, formidable feminist poets. And I love Adrienne Rich, and I had really been reading a lot of John Donne poems prior to that. I'd like Ben Jonson and John Donne, like light verse. And so I submitted stuff that was more along those lines. It wasn't modern poetry. It wasn't contemporary. But by the end of that class, I was writing contemporary poetry. And then it did feed into my songwriting for sure. I took another course after graduation. And at that point I was already writing songs, and I was performing at like open mics, cafes, and things around campus. And I was also in an a cappella singing group. So it was just really fun. I guess it was my version of a sorority.
Oh, I didn't realize you were performing in New York. I thought that didn't happen until a little later. My next question was going to be, did you go back to St. Louis or did you move straight to Chicago?
I went to St. Louis, and I had this boyfriend in college who up and down and long distance. And he and I went back to St. Louis, and it became clear that we weren't moving forward. We were like sweethearts since like sixth grade. I mean, we went back that long. Like, he carved our initials in a tree and in sixth grade. And then eventually when we were 19, we re-met at a Fishbone concert in St. Louis, and he was in a band, of course. And we ended up dating on and off for like all of college, or 3 years of it. And when I went back to St. Louis, it was pretty clear that it wasn't going forward. And I wanted to get out of there. And I had another friend I'd known since sixth grade, who lived in Israel. And he's like, come here. I just called him, and he's like, just come here. And so one night I just bought my ticket. I was at the Who concert one night with a bunch of friends. And the next morning I was on a plane to Israel.
What? Wow.
Yeah. He picked me up in Tel Aviv, and we went to Jerusalem. He lived in the Old City in the Jewish quarter. And I remember just looking out over the city with him from a rooftop and listening to Muslims calling people to prayer. And on the horn, I forget the name of it right now. And it was just so peaceful and so vastly different. It was an entirely different world from being at this arena watching the Who to being in Israel on the rooftop in the Old City. And I was there for 6 weeks. I traveled. I learned a ton about Judaism. I considered converting. I found God there. And then I had this calling because I had seen a theater company in Chicago earlier that summer called The New Criminals. I'd seen them work out, like do an improvisational workout, and they were so incredible. And another childhood friend was in that theater company. It was John Cusack's theater company.
Oh,
And
nice.
a lot of theater actors were in it. John's brother and Jeremy Piven, who we all have
Yeah.
come to. Paul Adelstein, who's a formidable actor and has a great career now. A lot of people came out of there. Paul Quinn, Aidan Quinn's brother, and Tim Robbins' sister, Adele. It was a really talented group of actors from Evanston, Illinois, and around Chicago. And I saw them. It was like punk rock theater. It was so cool. They wore the white face makeup. It was all based in 𝘊𝘵𝘵𝘬𝘭𝘦 𝘚𝘢𝘭𝘪, and I was so enthralled and like felt my heart racing, and I thought I could do that. I could do that. So when I was in Israel, I was both like lured to stay there instinctively. I felt like I want to stay. I just want to stay here. And then I also had this pull, like really strong pull to move to Chicago and start just be in the arts, like whether it's be in that theater company or play music full-time, start a band. It was calling me. And I had this vision of like driving a Jeep and blasting Zeppelin out of it. Like a convertible Jeep. I never got the Jeep. I did blast Zeppelin quite a bit, still do.
I believe that.
And I ended up leaving Israel and moving back to St. Louis. I literally, one of those kids in those big Catholic families, she was grown up and had an apartment with a room in it, and she said I could live in it. And so I packed up some like just trash bags full of clothes and got in my car, my little Mazda. It was not a Jeep and not very romantic. And I drove in the night. I remember I listened to Pink Floyd, Animals, and what's the other one? Pigs on a Wing.
Dogs, pigs, sheep.
Yeah, well, it's the one
Good
with Wish
album.
You Were Here on it, that album. All driving up to Chicago, and I moved to Chicago, and everything changed.
The story is that you had a party, I guess, at your house, and you decide to put your own cassette of music on. If I'm wrong, correct me. And Lily Taylor, I love her. You mentioned Cusack. I know her and Cusack work together a lot. Those Chicago people are all pretty tight in that area, the film area. And is this true that she heard it and she said, I have this friend named Nina, and then she told Nina about you, and that's how you guys met? Is that the real story?
Yeah, very much so. Lily actually, so I was dating Billy Cusack, who is John's brother.
You were? Wow.
Yeah,
Cool.
Bill, and he's the only other person I ever lived with other than my husband, because after that ended, I thought I'm not ever going to do this again till I know it's the right one. And but we were very close and lived together for a couple of years, and we were having a New Year's Eve party, and he said, it's just a small get together, and he said, Lily's in town and I'd love for you to meet her. You have to meet Lily. And Billy is the one who like sat me down and said, so I was writing songs and I was in this theater company, New Crime, at that point. And he I was really struggling with like, well, what do I do? What do I make my business? Like I have to choose. It really felt like that because I had a 4-track and I was recording my songs. And he said, you're a really good actor. You can do whatever you want. But I see you making records. I see you writing poetry, making records. I feel like that's that. And when he said that, it was like, I mean, he said CDs because that's what was happening at the time. But he said that, and it really resonated with me. And that moment changed everything. And I really have Billy to thank for that juncture in my life, that critical juncture, because if he believed in me that much, I that really propelled me, helped me believe in myself, I should say. And it's not just because he was someone, you know, the man in my life or whatever. It was because, in a way, it's because his family had already succeeded in a way that was only imaginary to me. Sort of, you know, John and Joan were already like in Hollywood. I used
Love
to,
Joan.
yeah, Joan's incredible. I used to leave my house in high school and say, "Bye, Mom, I'm off to Hollywood." And I didn't know what Hollywood was or where it was really. I just knew it was LA on the West Coast somewhere. But I was in the middle of the US in St. Louis, and it seemed like another world. And it was the joke because I was always acting and I was in theater and musicals, but that was always what I said. It was my sign off, right? And so anyway, when Billy said that, I see you making CDs, I see you writing poetry, and that's really what I feel like well, whatever, it's who he saw me as. And soon after, I was recording with my brother. My younger brother Eric was working at a studio in St. Louis, and he was recording his own music, but he facilitated this demo for me, and I was playing it when we had this party, and Billy had wanted to invite Lily Taylor, and I was a little threatened because they had dated, and I said, "Are you sure? I don't know if I want to meet your ex-girlfriend." And he said, no, you must meet her. It's not like that. She's so cool." So I believed him, and I said, okay. And she was, of course, incredible and awesome. And at one point I popped in the cassette, and she heard it, and I wasn't like everyone wasn't sitting down and intently listening to it. It was just on in the background.
Background music. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think she asked Billy who it was or something. And she came up to me and said, "Is this you?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "You have to meet my friend Nina." She said it with such insistence. And I said, "Okay." She said, she just graduated college. She's looking for people to play with. She's an incredible voice, and you guys have to meet. And it was basically like Lily set us up, as we've said a million times, on a blind date, and left town and left us to our own devices. And so the first time I met Nina, it was like me and my guitar knocking at her apartment door, and I played her some songs and she played me some of hers. I liked her instantly. She reminded me of my family, and I felt like I already knew her. And we sang together, and I thought, okay, this is it. This is what I do now.
And I know you tried a few other people out before Jim and Steve came into the picture, but it seemed like once they got on board with you guys, things started happening really quickly after that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Steve made just, if you're ever trying to start a band, children, just play with the person you really like to be around and who just makes sense. You just know. It's like you hear someone playing along with your songs, and Steve just fit in and elevated our songs in a way that we didn't know was possible. And that was that. It was like a done deal. I guess it was just like when I met Nina and played with Nina, sang together. I thought, done deal. This is right. This feels right. And then same with Steve. It was just like, oh, he's right. He's perfect. And he's perfect because it's hard to put your finger on, but because he just instinctively knows what to play. And he's sensitive to the music, and he's cool as fuck, and he's a really nice person, and we all fit together. And then we were auditioning drummers, and nice people, you know. We weren't feeling like we had that experience with anybody yet. And Jim's Nina's brother, of course, and he's more of a bass player, guitar player, pianist, singer, songwriter, everything but drummer. But he did play some drums, and he said, I don't know, you know, if you guys want, I'll just come in and hit with you, just to give you an idea of another feel. We're like, sure, why not? It wasn't like we were auditioning Jim. He was just coming in. So we played with him, and I had that feeling of like, done deal. This is it. And I was so happy. It was so clear. It was so simple. It was like right in front of us, and he was in the family. And so I said, Jim, will you get a kit and join the band? And he's like, yeah. And that was that. It was just like amazing.
And you
And
guys didn't you guys didn't really play very many shows before Minty Fresh got involved with the band, did you?
no, 3 to be exact. Before
Three. Wow.
yeah, yeah. I think Jim was at our first show, as was Brad Wood, who recorded American Thighs. And they were friendly and had some kind of deal where Brad was recording Jim's 7 inches for Minty Fresh, which was a brand new label at that point. He tried to sign Liz Phair to Zoo Records, and they passed. So he left Zoo. And then Matador signed Liz. But he was done. He's like, I know what's good. I don't need a label to, I don't want to speak for Jim, but that was his path. But when we met, he was just eager to get us in the studio. And so he asked Brad to record us. And instead of doing a bunch of different 7 inches, to just put it all into this one album. And I don't know if Brad knew what he was getting into, because we were not easy to record. We weren't like some bands can just go in and knock it out in a couple of weeks. We had 2 weeks scheduled, and it took much longer than that. So we started touring intermittently between like stretches in the studio, because they were booked. They had other bands coming in. And so they fit us in where they could, and we finished the record piecemeal. And so by the time when 𝘂𝘓 suddenly came out, we chose to put it out, but we didn't know it was going to hit the way it did. We didn't even have a finished record to release. So we, silly now to think about it, but we were like asking radio to hold off on playing it, because we weren't ready. We didn't have a product.
I remember that time well, because I was at A&M Records, and I remember you guys kind of came out of nowhere. I know a lot of people says that happened, but did it feel like you sort of got shoved into the public eye really quickly? I know that you and Nina had been working on songs for a few years before that, but the success kind of came really quickly, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. It came out of nowhere. We were not expecting that at all. And we were, of course we were over the moon. We didn't even know what was happening to us. And it was like a whirlwind. Because, I was essentially, we were managing the band, obviously. And if not more so me, because we were both fielding all the calls, and it was a lot. Like I feel this way a little right now, honestly, because I'm self-managing, although I have a co-manager now, who's taking so much off of my plate and helping me immeasurably. But I've been self-managing Sleepwalker and this whole project. And I remember it is hearkening back to what it felt like in the beginning of Veruca Salt, to come home and literally have, at the time it was like, now it's like 17 or to 20 emails waiting for me, right? Or texts, or, at the time it was voicemails, and I had an answering machine, and it would just blink. I remember the number 17 blinking at me when I came home one day. It was like booking agents, managers, lawyers, clubs, press. It was everyone who wanted to talk to us right at that moment, and be a part of this. And we felt like, okay, this has gotten bigger than us, and we can't really manage this on our own. But that said, getting managers was, it changed us. And I don't know that it was the smartest move in hindsight. I don't know that we had a choice. Maybe it was the management we chose, but we really needed somebody grounded to help us through what was happening to us, and to be able to recognize it, identify it, and talk to us about what this was, be able to put a name on it and say, we've seen this before, we understand what's happening to you, and let us give you like a tutorial, like let's lay the groundwork so you guys know what's going on. And to see, like, to protect us from ourselves, really, from like the inner workings of the band, to be able to say like, this is going to get hard on you guys. I think the best advice we got was not from our management, was from Vicki Peterson from the Bengals. When we were in New Orleans, and we were driving around with her and a friend in his really cool car. And we went to a couple bars with them, I think. She came to our show, and of course we really admired her, loved the Bengals. And she said, do not let them like pit you against each other, because the industry will try to do that. And it wasn't just the industry, it's like it's society. I mean, it's really just systemic gender bias, sexism, not wanting women to succeed. There's this, it's all ingrained in our culture. And it's the messaging that we received. Like, we couldn't have just we couldn't have two lead singers. It had to be one. And one of us had to be better than the other. And, everyone chose a favorite. And I mean, that goes for like, men too. Like, if you want to use the Beatles, for example, like there's people love John, people love Paul, people love to choose, people love George, people love to choose one they like the best. So that's natural. It's fun for fans, right? But like, we needed someone to really kind of like hold our hands through what was happening, because we were absolutely overtaken by sudden fame.
I loved Blow It Out Your Ass. I remember buying that and thinking, Chicago band, Chicago producer Steve Albini, and Europe and Shimmer, and the whole thing was so great because I didn't know what direction you guys were going in. And then you come out with this real heavy thing. And I was like, this is fantastic. I remember we had this band. This is a funny story, but I got to tell you this. I remember we had this band, Fig Dish. They were a Polydor band, but they were marketed through A&M Records. And I met the guys in the band, and they had just done some dates with you guys. And there were a bunch of people standing around. And I'll admit it, I had a crush on Louise at the time, like a million other boys and girls. And I'm like, everyone's, how's the tour going? How was it? And I'm like, how was Louise? Everyone looked at me like, you idiot, which I can laugh about now. But at the time, the band's like, that's what you want to know about our tour, how Louise was?
Well, first of all, I'm flattered. And secondly, flattered that, it was me and not Nina. I'm just kidding. But secondly, the irony in that is that one of the lead singers of that band was dating Nina. I don't know if you knew that part. So that probably added a layer of complication to their response.
I didn't care. I was a, alternative marketing guy at a record label, and they were like, very low on our radar, unfortunately. And I didn't think it was funny. It was a funny thing, but I do remember that because you guys because when I heard that EP, I was like, wow. Then you recorded 8 Arms to Hold You with Bob Rock. And I was like, wait a second. They just went from Albini to Bob Rock. Can you just tell me how the hell that happened?
Yeah. First of all, Albini was, can I curse on your podcast?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, good. I don't know. Albini was just like a big fuck you to the like indie than thou community in Chicago that we felt snubbed by. And it was originally going to be called Blow It Out Your Indie Ass. It's Veruca Salt. And we changed it. It was too long of a name, couldn't be bothered. But so we had wanted to record American Thighs with Albini. But we also did with Brad, and we made the decision was kind of, we made the decision ourselves, but we still wanted to record with Steve, and we had no regrets about Brad, of course. So it was a perfect opportunity to get off the road and just record an EP with Steve. And beyond that, we were on tour with Live and PJ Harvey.
Wow.
Playing Sheds in 1995. And so I remember we were doing the West Coast, and I just remember every day we'd be sitting at catering and listening to the sound man for Live ring out the system, the sound system with Enter Sandman. Like that's the song he would play every day to hear if everything is sounding right. And so every day we heard Enter Sandman. And one day we were talking about who we were going to record the record with. And we had a meeting with Brendan O'Brien, who's amazing.
Yeah.
But he said he works really fast. He said, I don't work longer than 7 weeks. He's like, after 7 weeks, I'm done. And that may seem like a long time to make a record to certain people, but to us, it wasn't. We really wanted to dig in. We wanted to have a few months. And I mean, like minimum 3 months to make our record. We wanted to really spend time on it. And so we thought, unfortunately, that wasn't a match, only because of his timing limit. And so we had the same management as Metallica also at the time. And they'd kind of been known to be like, at the time, sort of dinosaurs in the industry, because they managed like Def Leppard and Metallica and these bands that were like, really cool, but like metal bands, and metal wasn't the coolest thing at the moment,
Right.
And they had seemed to have had their day. And we met with them, and Nina and I just kept making these decisions in the band that just seemed like the most punk rock thing to do, the most surprising thing to do. And with the EP, with 𝘕𝘀𝘀𝘵, we just wanted to keep recording. I probably made that happen because I was just like always wanting us to go forward. And Nina calls me the quarterback. Like I was always, and still am, when, in the recent past, like always throwing the ball down the field, always making the next play. And sending us downfield towards the goal, the field goal. But at any rate, goalpost is what I'm looking for. Anyway, so we're sitting around the catering and listening to Enter Sandman every day, and we had the same management as Metallica. We knew Bob Rock because of Metallica and our management. And there we were listening to this, and somebody said, like, maybe me, maybe Nina, maybe Jim, like, what sounds better than this? And we wanted to make a monster rock record. Like we wanted to go the distance. And in some ways, American Thighs had sounded really indie to us, and we were ready to sound big. We wanted to sound really big. And in hindsight, like Butch Vig would have been a good, call. But I think at that point it started Garbage and was really involved in very much taken up with that. But I don't even remember if that came up. We had lunch with him because we talked about re-recording American Thighs at one point. I won't get into all that, but yeah, we just thought, what sounds better than Enter Sandman? What sounds better than the Black Album? Nothing. So let's work with Bob. And we just made a decision right then and there. And we're also, again, we're just like, fuck all y'all. We're going to record this monster rock record with Bob Rock. It's going to be incredible.